Hi, everybody. How is week one? Wow, it's only week one. How's week one going? I'm
having a really hard time with
actually, I'm
everything.
going to listen to you while I go pull out our PowerPoint. Wait, I put them in a folder.
I'm having a really hard time with everything. I don't know if you can hear me.
Oh, shoot. I have something to post for you. I meant to post it and then I forgot. You're going to want to grab this before break or right after break. I'll post an announcement. Well, if my computer would respond, I would post an announcement. Oh, I also know another way to give it to you. I'm going to try. I remember in Zoom, okay, Daniel. I had somebody send me a file through Zoom. I'm gonna have to look and see how I can do that. Okay, so I just put the review for the week one quiz in a course announcement. So you're gonna wanna pull it before we go to, you're gonna wanna pull it before we come back from break. And I'm pulling up chapter 15, so we can finish talking about that and we can talk about chapter 16. So remember, the most important things out of chapter 15 is how we calculate overhead, which we're going to finish talking about. And then the most important parts out of chapter 16 are equivalent units. So I'm just waiting for the PowerPoint to decide to open. Maybe I'll impatiently go open it again. Okay, so while I'm waiting for that, how is week one going? I'm going to unmute everybody so you can all tell me. How do you feel about it so far?
I've had a really hard time with everything. I feel like I'm not understanding it at all.
Oh, wait. Okay, so anybody who's been speaking to me, I didn't hear you because I had my mute on.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I was like, wow, nobody's talking at all.
I thought you were ignoring me because
I'm like, finally it's like, okay, there's no way I'd ask this many times and still nobody would say a single thing. That's insane. Okay.
I was just gonna say, I'm struggling with it, and I think I did fairly decent in in the financial accounting, and I mean, I think it's pretty much like the same kind of to me, and I feel like I'm not doing well at all because I took it like 3 years ago, so I feel like I'm not doing good at all. Like I'm not getting any of it.
I think that's because we have a lot to still go over before the end of this week. Because when I was putting together the quiz review, don't seem to be able to open PowerPoint here. When I was putting together the quiz review, I was thinking that that there's really a ton of information in week one. And so I think that's part of it. I think it's that, we've gone over terminology, and we've gone over some of the costs, and it's all new vocabulary. There's just so much new material that I think that's part of the problem. I think the way you're feeling is probably the way everybody's feeling.
Okay, I hope so, because I feel like a lot of people knew what they were doing and I had no idea.
I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you feel secure, or are you, still working through it?
Still working through it.
That's what I would expect. And I've been teaching this class for a really long time. Oh, there we go. Microsoft PowerPoint has stopped working. Of course, it stopped working.
But I do understand that it's normal that like a lot of people don't get it because there is a lot of terminology, and I think that's what's throwing me off.
There is a lot of terminology, and in week one, there is a ton of terminology. But then we keep working with those same costs over the next 3 weeks, and using them, so it gets easier. And I have a review that shows exactly what's going to be on the quiz too. So that should be helpful, and we're going to go over it.
Okay, that's perfect. I was kind of hoping you would have something like that.
Yep. PowerPoint. Do you want to open it? No, I don't want to open in safe mode. I just want to open it. I just had it open 2 hours ago. Okay, anything else? Any other feelings? Are you afraid to tell me? Are you kidding me? Oh. Let me just pull it up from our course. But I went and I like revised it. The heck? Okay, now it's opening, finally. I'm like, not only did I revise it, I made a review. Okay. I'm just going to sit here on my hands and be patient. I'm not very patient. We talked about the difference between a job order costing system and a process costing system. And remember, in a job order costing system, it's like everything's clearly distinct. We track the cost by jobs. And then we looked at overhead, and this is where we left off. So we left off where we were talking about the overhead rate. So materials, because remember we have direct materials, direct labor, and the manufacturing overhead. And direct materials comes from what we requisition for our job. Direct labor comes from payroll. So what's left is our overhead rate. And overhead is interesting because we're going to put the actual overhead expenses into our overhead account, but what we're going to take out is going to be based on this rate. So what we expense every period is going to be based on this overhead rate that we've determined. And we talked about how we're taking estimated overhead cost divided by an estimated activity base. So everything about this rate is an estimate. So then the question is, how do we apply the rate? So once we've gotten the rate, then we'll say, okay, so like this one, if we did, if we had used, so here we've gotten the rate of 1.6. So we did it based on estimated overhead and estimated direct labor hours. I should write that down for you. And so what we're going to do now is, so our rate was based on this rate was based on estimated overhead divided by estimated labor cost. And that's what gave us this 1.6. Now to apply the rate, we're going to take we're going to take our rate times our actual amount. So here we're going to do the actual direct labor costs. So this is an estimate. 100% is an estimate. When we apply it, we multiply it by an actual amount. So then what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, so for this job, we're going to charge $6,720 in overhead. So we're going to put it into work in process, take it out of work and put it into work in process, and take it out of factory overhead. So what's happening there is we have our manufacturer's overhead account, right? And we're going to look at this more. So actual expenses go in here. This is where we record things like the depreciation on the manufacturing equipment, the editorial services, the salaries and wages for the production manager. Our estimated amount based on our rate, this, is what we're going to take out. And that's going to go into our work in process account. So actual amounts go into our overhead account and estimated amounts come out of our overhead account. Now, as you can already figure out, that's going to create at least one issue. One of the issues that that's going to create is that when we get to the end of a period, there's going to be a reconciliation because it's unlikely that we would have estimated exactly the same amount as what actually went into the account. Does that make sense? So let's look at indirect material, indirect labor, and then manufacturing overhead. So to record indirect materials used, what we have is, this is coming from, what was requisitioned. For the job. So like in our cushion manufacturing company, we would say, okay, we need, 50 yards of fabric for this job. So that's our raw materials. So what's happened here is we have our raw materials, which remember is a inventory account. And here what we're doing is, this is more like the glue. So in raw materials, we started out with the balance, right? And now what we've done here is we've taken it out of raw materials and put it into our overhead account. Now, at the same time, what you're not seeing is, this is for indirect materials. Where are direct materials going to go? Where do direct materials go? They go straight to work in process. They go straight to work in process. Does that make sense? So if we backed up here and we looked at, I'll do it in a minute. I'll do it down here. So this is indirect labor. because indirect labor is still overhead. So what we have is we have our wages that we're going to take out that go on the income statement, but we're going to separate the wages that have to do with, so here's all of our wages expense, right? We're going to separate out what has to do with actually producing the product. And that comes out of here and goes into our manufacturing overhead account. So notice again, this is actual. We're putting these costs in. We're putting so in our manufacturing overhead account, we have indirect labor, indirect materials, and then our other overhead. All right, are we good there? Now's a good time I'm just going to unmute you so we can talk, so that you actually talk to me.
One of the practice problems that was dealing with the other various overhead, I was confused as to like how to debit and credit which account.
Okay. With and I'm gonna mute so we're not echoing. Okay, so it is confusing because a lot of the terminology in the counts are new. So for instance, with this, anything that goes into this, we were classifying costs on Tuesday. So if you think about it, what goes into these other overhead costs, what you want to look for is that this says like for the factory. Anything for like the factory or the manufacturing facility goes into overhead for manufacturing overhead. Whereas, come back, please come back. Whereas the, like if this was prepaid insurance on the office space, then it doesn't go into manufacturing overhead. If it was utilities payable on the office space, it doesn't go into manufacturing overhead. Does that answer it? Yes, no, maybe? Okay. We'll work some too. All right, so this is what's happening. And I'm going to make this bigger here. Okay, so this is what's happening. So we have our 3 inventory accounts, right? 1, 2, 3. So in our inventory accounts, we have our raw materials. We purchase those from our supplier and we put them into our inventory. Into work in process goes 3 things: direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. Now, the part that's missing here is that here we put indirect labor, indirect materials, and other overhead, right? And then we take out and it goes there. And that's how direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead gets put into work in process. And a lot of this chapter is focused on how do we do this. Then we manufacture the goods, and as we finish them, now we finish these goods and we're putting them into finished goods. Now they're ready to sell. Still an inventory account. It gets on our income statement when they're sold. When they're sold, it comes out of finished goods and goes into cost of goods sold on our income statement. All right, are we good with the process? Fine, I'm going to unmute you so you talk to me. Are we good with the process?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so this is complicated to read, and it really doesn't tell you much more than what we just went over. It's really confusing, but this is a good summary of the journal entries that are involved in the process. And then we did a cost of goods manufactured schedule. What you have to remember again is, so in manufacturing, we have our direct materials, our direct labor, and our manufacturing overhead. That goes into our work in process account, right? Direct materials, direct labor, manufacturing overhead. And then we just have to figure out, okay, this is the total cost of everything we had in process. This is what we removed. So if this is cost of goods manufactured, this is what we still have left, still there, still working on it. And the cost of goods manufactured went to finished goods. So direct material, direct labor, and factory overhead. Okay, now, because we estimate, because when we do factory overhead, our actual amounts go in, and this is based on our estimated rate is what we take out in expense, right? They're not going to work out evenly. So if I have more actual than applied, I have under applied my expense. So if I have something left here, that means I am under applied. I didn't apply enough. If I have more applied than actual, I am over applied. I applied too much expense. So if there's something left here, then I'm over applied. I applied too much. Either way, I need to fix it. So what I'm going to do most of the time is I'm going to put the difference into cost of goods sold to adjust my overhead account. So I may debit cost of goods sold and I may credit cost of goods sold, depending on if I have over applied or under applied my overhead. But when I'm done reconciling the account, the balance in this account will be zero. Good there? Okay. See if I have 16 opened up anywhere here. Okay, so the biggest thing in chapter 16 is that we're going to learn about equivalent units, because now we're going to track costs. Instead of tracking them by job, we're going to track them through a production process. So let's say we were talking about a software company, soft drink company. We would have the bottling department, the mixing department, the If you're making wine, you know, you have the vats, you have the storage, you're making cider, you've got the, you know, where the apples are, and then you've got them crushed, and then you've got the bottling, and then you've got the labeling. And so we track the cost from one department to the next department to the next department, instead of by work in process, raw materials, and finished goods by job. So because of that, there's more times that we have a lot of partially finished product. In fact, all the time we have partially finished product. And so we have to be able to account for costs of goods sold and costs of goods finished. Well, we can't do that unless we know how many units we manufactured. But the problem is that we have portions of units that are manufactured. And so we have to figure out, using what's called equivalent units, how many units, if we were going to translate it into full units, how many units we've done. And that's the hardest part about this chapter. So this is just a review of what we had kind of talked about on Tuesday. We use this type of manufacturing process for homogeneous things, like, you know, if we were going to manufacture jeans, if we were going to manufacture t-shirts, if we were going to manufacture soda pop, if we were going to manufacture laundry detergent, you know, all of those things are the kinds of companies that use this type of accounting. Okay. So we're going to talk about equivalent units and how we use them to figure out how many units we want to expense. So we're going to take a scenario here. So here's what happens. So let's say that, depending on what you're manufacturing, direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead get added at different points in the process. So one of the things that we're going to look at is, at what point in the process does direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead get added? Because if, like, all the materials go in the very beginning, then when we're calculating our equivalent units, we calculate them by direct materials, direct labor, and overhead. So, like, they might be 100% done for direct materials, but they're only 50% done for direct labor. So we can put all of the direct materials costs in, but only 50% of the direct labor costs. And so you're going to see how we do that. It sounds complicated, but if you just follow this 4-step process, it isn't quite as complicated as it sounds. All right, we're going to work an example and talk about how it works each step of the way. So the first thing we have to do is we have to figure out the physical flow of units, because until you have a picture of how the units flow through the process, you can't figure out, like, when are materials added, when is labor added. Then we're going to compute equivalent units. Then we're going to figure out how much cost do we assign to each one of those equivalent units. And then we can reconcile the costs. Sounds like a lot. Okay, so here's our process for generation X. So the first thing that happens is we start out in beginning work in process. And on March 1st, we have 30,000 units in work in process. So right now we have 30,000 units in work in process. During the period, we're going to start another 90,000 units. That means that we have 120,000 units to account for. Because, in other words, 120,000 units had costs added somewhere. We transferred out 100,000 units. So 100,000 units were done. So at the end, we had 20,000 units left in ending inventory. So you can see here, we have 120,000 units to account for. Or if you said, how many were transferred out and how many are left, we're still with that number of 120,000. Because this is kind of like in financial accounting when we talked about inventory and we said, are goods available for sale? That's what this is equivalent to. This is everything we could have manufactured. Everything that could have been finished, whether it was or not, is there. And then the total units accounted for is the difference between what got finished, which is now in ending inventory, and what got and units completed and transferred. The 100,000 units in ending inventory that got sold and done, and the 20,000 units that are still in process. So either way we look at it, we have 120,000 units to account for. All right, are we good with the 120,000 units? Because we have to understand the data to be able to understand the process. So if we're not good, you have to let me know.
I'm good with this, but, and I might be jumping the gun, indirect material usage.
We'll get there.
All right, forget my question then.
It's a good question. It's just bite-sized pieces. Okay. Now, if we look at direct materials, what we're saying here is that percentage of completion. So all of these units, as far as direct materials, are 100% done. So I would be able to say that for direct materials, I have 100,000 units complete. I've put all the materials in. Now, for conversion costs, which is conversion is direct labor and manufacturing overhead. For conversion costs, I'm only 65% done. For all of these that are in process. These are all 100% done because they were finished. So no matter what, they're 100% done. For my ending inventory, they're still 100% done for materials because I put those in at the beginning, but they're only 25% done for conversion costs. Remember when we talked about the difference between prime and conversion costs? And conversion costs include direct labor and manufacturing overhead. All right, now a little bit more. If we look at this, our schedule here, our beginning, these up here are in units. Down here, obviously, are in dollars. So down here, I know that I've spent $81,000 on direct materials and $108,900 on conversion costs for my beginning work in process. So these 30,000 units have consumed these resources. Then I have my costs during the period. I added direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead of these amounts. These went into the units started this period. So now we've accounted for all 120,000, the costs for all 120,000 units. What I can't tell you from this is how much of the cost goes to my completed units, my ending, and how much of those, like cost of goods sold, and how much of those costs stay in ending work in process. That's what I can't tell you. That's why we have to do equivalent units. Are we good here? So what we're going to do now is we're going to figure out how do we apportion, first of all, how do we figure out the equivalent units, and then how do we divide these costs up for the equivalent units. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the cost flow. We're going to say, okay, we know that in beginning work in process, we started 30,000 units. We had 30,000 units. We started another 90, so there's 120. Over here, the units to account for is we've transferred out 100,000. We have an ending work in process 20. So we have our 120,000 units. So now we know where our units are, and we know by where they are what we've put into them. Now we're going to figure out equivalent units, because of these 90,000 units that were started this period, what happened was some of them are done and some of them aren't, but they're all in different stages of completion. So number 2, what we're going to do now is we're going to figure out our equivalent units of production. So what we're going to look at is we're going to say, okay, first of all, let's take what was transferred out. We're going to separate this by direct materials and conversion cost. If we start with, this is what has already been transferred out. We transferred out 100,000 units. Because they were transferred out, they're obviously completely finished. So those 100,000 units are completely finished, so they're 100% done. So we have 100,000 units for direct materials completely finished, and 100,000 units for conversion costs completely finished. Now we're going to look at what is left in work in process. We have 20,000 units left. Does that 20,000 number sound familiar? Do you remember where the 20,000 came from? Okay, we have 20,000 units left. We know that that 20,000 units for direct materials is 100% done. So we're going to add that here. Under direct materials, these 20,000 units are completely done. But for conversion costs, they're only 25% done. So if I have 20,000 units that are 25% complete, my equivalent units completed are 5,000. Are we good there? Because they're only 25% complete for conversion, my equivalent units, like all the way complete units for conversion costs, are 5,000. So now I can say for direct materials, I've finished 120,000 units. And for conversion costs, I've finished 105,000 units. So now I have 2 things. Now I have my costs that I haven't assigned to my units yet, and I know how many units. So now I know, if I know my direct materials per unit, I know how much to expense for direct materials. If I know my conversion cost per unit, I know how much to expense for conversion costs. All right, before we move on and start calculating, are we good here?
Are we always going to be given the percentage of completion for conversion?
Yes, you have. Well, if it's not for conversion, and often it is, but if it isn't, you're going to be given the percentage complete for whatever you're trying to calculate. Because you wouldn't know it. The only way you would know it is if you were working there and you went out and you looked and you counted.
Okay, so we will always be given some number to figure out one or the other.
You will always be given some number to figure out both of them.
Okay.
Okay, so direct materials. So we have direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. If you put these 2 together, they're called prime costs. If you put these 2 together, they're called conversion costs. And we went over that definition on Tuesday, so you just have to kind of remember it. The way I remember conversion costs is if I have direct material and I want to get from the direct materials to a finished product, I have to add to that, to convert it to a finished product, I have to add to that direct labor and manufacturing overhead. So that's what conversion cost is. This is direct labor and manufacturing overhead. All right, now we know how many equivalent units we have. Now we're going to put dollars to them. So in the beginning, our cost for beginning work in process inventory for direct materials and conversion costs were $81,000 and $108,900. The additional costs we incurred this period, which we already looked at earlier, was $279,000 and $376,200. So we know our total costs for direct materials and conversion. So those are our total costs. Now we also know our equivalent units. So if we take our equivalent unit and divide it by our costs, it goes the other way. I knew it did. I'm looking at this going, wait, it goes the other way. Then we find out that this is like $3 per equivalent unit. And same thing here. We took the cost divided by the number of units gave us the $4.62 per equivalent unit. So we know we haven't finished every single unit for conversion, but now we know we can use the equivalent units and our costs that we know to figure out a cost per unit. So that's what we're doing here. We're figuring out cost per unit. And then the fourth thing is what we're going to do with the cost per unit. After we figure out the cost per unit, now we can assign costs. So when we go to assign costs, now I'm saying, okay, so I have the costs that are completed and transferred out, and I have the costs still in ending work in process inventory. So for the units that were completed and transferred out, everything was 100% done. So I know that I've done it correctly because I can take my 100,000 units for direct materials at the $3 per unit and the 100,000 units for conversion at the $462 per unit, and I get this amount for my costs for everything that I completed this period. And then for ending work in process, I know I have 20,000 units there completely done for direct materials, and I have the equivalent of 5,000 units for conversion cost at $462 per unit. And here's my total cost that I've accounted for. And if you look back at our original schedule on our costs, 845,100, 845,100. But now we've broken it down. And for that matter, for beginning work in process, here's my 189,900. Okay. Questions? We should work one.
Good idea.
Okay. Let's I actually think we're going to work this together. I don't know. Let's see what we have. So how do I move on? How do I move on? Can I not just move on to number 2?
Are you in Connect?
Oh, I'm not showing my screen. Well, that would be. So, yeah, because when I did student view, I decided I just have to do everything myself. Do you remember which question has to do with equivalent units? Oh, there we go. That's right.
It's still not letting us go.
I've got to change that.
And it wasn't allowing us to do. You have to work the problem and then score it, and then I'll allow you to go to the next one.
Questions are ordered. I bet that's where it is. I've never set mine up that way. I changed that too. Allow students to revise their previous attempts. Where does I can pull it up a different way, but I don't like not being able to, no time limit, printing, questions are ordered. Okay, I'm gonna have to look. That's weird. I'm gonna have to call Sharon. Yeah, I don't like that. After each question, I'm gonna have to ask her how to change that. I swear, I mean, it didn't do that in my class, right? Last term?
No, not for 201.
Yeah. So I don't even know where he said it, how he said it like that. I hate it though. It's stupid. I mean, it's such a creative approach. That's what I meant.
Took a second.
It's nice to know that there are other ways of doing things. I know what I'm going to do. We'll work that in a minute. Okay. I got more than one way to skin a cat. Previous. Duh. Don't ever fall on your head. Does the homework do that too? You guys, does the homework do that too?
I haven't gotten that far yet.
Okay. Oh, that's right. It's only week 1.
Well, Corey says no.
Corey says no? Okay. So I can look and compare at how they did that. Raw materials, work in process, finished goods, raw materials, payroll, overhead. Nope, just journal entries. Thinking the homework problem. There we go. There we go. Number 5. Oh, wait. There we go. Okay. This is good because we can work it and then look at it as soon as it's done filling in. All right, so we have, can you see this? I'm not doing something stupid like not sharing, right? Okay.
No, we can see it.
Okay, good. Yeah, I could do that. Okay, the production department in a process manufacturing system completed 80,000 units of product and transferred them to finished goods. So I cannot write on here. Oh, let's try this. What did I do to write on here? Oh. No, working.
No.
What? What's wrong? Is your stomach upset? Kelton, come here. Okay, I will be down in like 3 minutes. Okay? Hey, go look in the cabinet. I'll be down in like 3 minutes. Are you okay? Okay, we're going to talk through it. No, we're going to go work one. We'll talk through this one and we'll go work one for the quiz. One just like one on the quiz. All right, so the production department in a process manufacturing system completed 80,000 units of product. I remember how I did it. And transferred them to finished goods. So 80,000 units are done. So 80,000 units are 100% complete for everything. Are we good there?
Yes.
Okay, so of these, 24,000 were in process at the beginning of the period, and the other 56,000 were started during the period. So the first thing that you want to do, remember, is figure out the flow. So the first thing we want to do, I'm going to use this, is figure out the flow. So we're going to say, all right, so for the goods completed, we had 80,000 units. There's our 80. And our ending work in process is 16,000 units. At period end, 16,000 units were in process. Now, I'd have to look at the required information, and I see, okay, the production department in a process manufacturing system completed 80,000 units of product and transferred them to finished goods. They just said the same thing. Why did they say the same thing? Under each of the three separate, prepare the department's equivalent units of production. So for materials, everything is done. So for materials, all direct materials are added to the products when the processing begins. So for everything that was completed during the period, we're 100% done for everything. So we're 100% done for materials. For what's still in ending inventory, work in process, we've still put in all of the materials. So we're 100% for materials also. So we have 96,000 units 100% done for materials. And our materials cost is $96,000. I mean, sorry, that's 96,000 units still. Okay, so we're 100% done for materials for 96,000 units. Now the beginning inventory is 40% complete as to materials and conversion costs. Ending inventory is 75% complete as to materials and conversion costs. So now we're going to say, okay, so we completed 80,000 units. They're 100% done for materials. In our ending work in process, we still have 16,000 units. They're 75% done for materials and conversion costs. So that gives us an equivalent of 12,000 finished units, because 75 times 16,000 is 12,000 units. So for conversion costs, materials and conversion costs and ending inventory, we have the equivalent of 92,000 units. For beginning inventory, we're 60% complete for materials and 40% complete for conversion costs. Ending inventory is 30% complete for materials and 60% complete for conversion costs. So now if we were doing it that way, we'd say, okay, 80,000 units are complete. So they're 100% done. So that's always going to be 100%. Now our ending units, we have 16,000 units, but now we're saying, okay, they're 30% complete. So 30% times 16,000 is 4,800 units. So do you see how that works as far as figuring out the equivalent number of units?
I'm so confused.
Okay.
I'm confused because like I don't know if we're supposed to be adding it and making it 100. Like on number 3, it says ending inventory is 30% and 60% complete as conversion. And
but we're only looking at materials here.
Okay.
That's all, because see here we just have materials. So we're just looking at 3 different ways of calculating it. We would have to, so like we did, and we're going to work a complete one. In fact, we should.
This says 60% complete as to conversion cost. That has nothing to do with what we're trying to figure out here.
Right, because right here we're only doing materials. Conversion costs is direct labor and manufacturing overhead. So if we were going to do complete costs, which I would think there's another part of this, but maybe not. If we were going to do complete costs, what we would do is, then we would say, so then we would say, okay, the other piece of this is for conversion costs, our goods completed are 80,000 times 100%, right? Because they're done, gives us 80,000 units. And there's 75% complete as to materials and conversion. Oh wait, they didn't separate that. Materials and 60% complete. We can't do that one, but we can do this one. So, because there they combined it. So here we can say, okay, so we have 80,000 units at 100% because they're done, so they're obviously finished. And now we have the 30% for materials and 60% for conversion costs. So we had 16,000 units in ending inventory times 60%. So 60,000 times 60% is 36,000 units.
$16,000 times 60%?
Yes, because we have if we counted the units, we have a total of 16,000 units in ending work in process. But for equivalent units, they're only 30% done for materials. So for materials, we're going to say we have a total of 4,800 finished units. In other words, units that we've invested all of our materials expense in. And for conversion costs, there's 60%. So we're going to take the 60%. So for conversion costs, we have the equivalent of 36,000 units. The reason that we do this is so that,
I'm sorry, 16,000 times 60% is 9,600 or 9,600.
Oh yeah, that would be, what was in my calculator? Thank you. Just forget about this. There we go. The reason we do this is because now we can figure out a conversion cost per unit, and we can figure out a materials cost per unit. We can't do that off of the 16,000 units because they're all piecemeal with materials and conversion costs. So we don't have any way of figuring out how much on a per unit basis we spent. That's the purpose of this. We're going to come back and work. We'll go work a whole one. There's got to be one on the test. I'll go look at it. Yes?
Okay.
I know. It's still confusing. We need to work all the way through one. I think what we'll do... Let me look and see what's on the test before... There's several on the test. Let's look at the ones on the test. There's a lot. Let's take a 10-minute break. It's going to be okay. Come back, and we'll go through the quiz review, and we'll work all of them. Sound good?
Okay.
Sort of good. Nervous. I get that. I'm going to pause recording. Think. Yeah. Somebody. Okay, let's look at number 14. And then, I mean, we're going to go through all of them. And if we don't finish them, we'll finish tomorrow if we have to. So let's look at number 14. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that you get the information straight. So when we're looking at this, we're going to say, okay, a production department's output for the most recent month, we want to calculate equivalent units. A production department's output for the most recent month consisted of 12,000 units completed and transferred to the next stage. So we have units completed, $12,000. So we know that those are done for everything, right? All right. And we have 12,000 units in ending work in process inventory. That's weird. The units in ending work in process inventory were 80% complete for direct materials and conversion costs. So we have in ending inventory, 12,000 units, 80% complete for direct materials and conversion costs. In ending work in process. The units in ending work in process, 80%. There were 1,400 units in beginning work in process. And they were 90% complete for direct materials and conversion. So this one we're showing the whole thing, because direct materials conversion, remember, is direct labor and manufacturing overhead is conversion costs. And direct materials, direct labor and direct materials are prime costs, just by definition. Okay, 90% complete. Calculate the equivalent units of production for the month, assuming we use the weighted average method. Okay, so we know that we have 12,000 units that are 100% complete. And then we know that we have another 12,000 units in ending inventory. Does our beginning work in process count? Do we need that for anything? Think about it. We don't need our beginning work in process because that's already included in our ending inventory and what was completed. So if we take what was completed plus ending inventory, this is everything. Because it was completed and what's left. Does that make sense? So we don't actually need this. Are we good? So I know that I have 12,000 units completely finished. And I have in work in process 12,000 units that are 80% finished. So if I take, there's my phone.
It's a 9600.
Thank you. That sounds familiar. So we have an equivalent of 21,600 units completely finished. Does that make sense? And we'll work other pieces so that they finally all come together. It's a lot in week one. I know. It used to have 3 quizzes, and so I always put the first one off to week 2. Okay, I'm going to go back and start with the basics, which I know doesn't seem like basics because we've only been doing it for 4 days. All right, so question number 1. We want to figure out the cost of goods sold for a company. Remember what the formula is for cost of goods sold. We have our beginning finished goods. So the first thing you have to think about is cost of goods sold. If we're looking at cost of goods sold, we're looking at what was finished, because cost of goods sold goes from finished to cost of goods sold, right? So we know we're looking at that from starting with finished and moving to cost of goods sold. That's the first thing you have to look at. So we have our beginning finished goods. We're going to add whatever it costs us to manufacture that period. We're going to subtract what's left in finished goods. So beginning plus everything we added minus what's left. Will give us our cost of goods sold. Remember that formula? I told you we're going to use it over and over and over again. So now we just have to put numbers with it. So our beginning finished goods, we had 20,000 in beginning finished goods. We purchased raw materials of 18,000. So we added that. That was part of our cost of goods manufactured. Wait a minute. Nope.
Minus.
Yep, my bad. Raw materials, purchases. We're not going to do, no, we're not going to do anything with those because remember we have raw materials, work in process, finished goods, and then cost of goods sold. And we're looking at what's happening here. So what's happening with raw materials has nothing to do with anything. Because that's over here. So we're not going to do anything with raw materials. Not reading carefully. Raw materials don't matter. We have cost of goods manufactured of 30,000 and ending finished goods inventory of 17,000. So 50 minus 17 is 35, 37, 35, 33. Did I do that right? Because my head isn't working.
Yeah, that looks right.
Okay. 33,000. So my cost of goods sold is 33,000. Okay, do you understand why raw materials doesn't matter? You always have to think about, am I going between raw materials and work in process and finished goods, or finished goods and cost of goods sold? So if I'm focused here on finished goods and cost of goods sold, then raw materials doesn't matter. It didn't have anything to do with my beginning finished goods. It doesn't have anything to do with my cost of goods manufactured. It's still sitting there in raw materials ready to be used. Are we good? We are not talking. Number 2. Okay, now we get to practice prime costs and conversion costs. So we know, remember I said we have direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. Direct materials and direct labor are prime costs, and direct labor and manufacturing overhead are conversion. So if a company's prime costs are $4,500,000, so our direct materials plus direct labor are $4,500,000, and conversion costs are $7,100,000. So our direct labor and manufacturing overhead are $7,100,000. We know that direct materials are $2,500,000, and manufacturing overhead is $5,550,000. And I want to know what is direct labor. So I can figure out direct labor by using prime or conversion, right? So once I wrote this down, how can I figure out what direct labor is? What's one way I could figure out what direct labor is?
4,500,000 minus direct material.
Because I know that prime cost is direct materials and direct labor, and that's $4,500,000. So if I know that this is $4,500,000, and I know that direct materials is $2,500,000, then I know how much labor is.
2 million.
So you see how I just used the definitions to solve that? You just have to know what direct material, what prime cost and conversion costs include. Okay, we want to determine the total manufacturing costs incurred during the year. So, and we're given our work in process on January 1, so this is beginning. This is ending. We're giving direct materials, factory overhead, and direct labor. So we know that we always have direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. Gives us all of our costs, right? So now all we have to do is add them together. So direct material, $14,000. Direct labor, $28,000. And manufacturing overhead, $7,000. That was really sloppy of me. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
49.
49? Thank you. Make sense?
Yes.
That one was easier, right? See, some of them aren't hard. Just remember. Direct materials, direct labor, manufacturing overhead. Okay, now we want to figure out the manufacturing costs added during the year. This is the same. There's no difference except for one. So if we want to know manufacturing costs added during the year,
So
manufacturing costs added during the year. Oh, here's the twist. So the twist is that we have direct materials, direct labor, manufacturing overhead. Nope, there's no twist. How's your stomach? Do you want me to go get you something for it? Well, when I'm done. Direct materials, direct labor, manufacturing overhead.
$19,800.
Thank you. Okay, there's two that are doable, right?
Yeah.
Okay. We want to calculate cost of goods manufactured. So now we're going to do, if I looked at my work in process account to figure out what costs I incurred, remember I have direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. But I'm going to start out with my beginning balance because now that matters. So here's my beginning balance. So my beginning balance is $120,300. So that's what I started with. And then I'm going to add my direct materials, my direct labor, and my factory overhead. So my direct materials is 300, 300. My direct labor is 133, 800. And my factory overhead is 265, 800. All right, does that make sense? Beginning inventory, beginning stuff about cost and work in process. We added direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead this period. So far, I have spent 820,000. I'll work this one ahead of time. 820,200. This is my cost of goods manufactured. I'll show you how to find it. What do I have left? I have left an ending inventory. Ending work in process, 127,700. So if I put in a total of 820,200 and I have left 127,700, then I must have manufactured 692,500. This is also the same as saying, like our schedule, beginning plus what we added, direct materials, direct labor, manufacturing overhead, minus ending gives us cost of goods manufactured. Okay here?
We're good.
Okay, now we want to figure out ending work in process inventory. So you want to think about it, and it's still same formula. Beginning work in process plus direct materials, direct labor, manufacturing overhead, minus ending work in process gives us, sorry, here we want to do minus, because we don't have that, we'll do minus cost of goods manufactured, because we're calculating. What the heck? Gives us what's left. So beginning work in process, 90,000. We added direct materials. I'm like, where is it? 360,000. Direct labor, 230,000. Overhead, 350,000. Now we have our total costs. Cost of goods manufactured, 925,000. Gives us what's left over, which would be what? So 90,000 plus 360,000 plus 230,000 plus 350,000 minus 925,000, 105,000. Or if we were looking at that in our work in process account, what you would see is we started with 90,000. We added direct materials, direct labor, manufacturing overhead, And then we knew that we transferred out 925,000. And so what's left over is our 105. So are you starting to see like the pattern? Yes, no?
Yes.
Okay, let's look at applied overhead. Okay, the work in process, so we want to figure out how much is overhead. So remember that to calculate overhead, we, well, let's see what they give us. So the work in process inventory account of a manufacturing company that uses an overhead rate based on direct labor cost. Oh, so manufacturing overhead. Let's see here. Uses an overhead rate based on direct labor cost. Remember, actual goes in, estimated goes out. Has a $4,200 debit balance after all the posting is completed. Oh wait, it's the inventory account that has the debit balance.
Direct labor costs.
Huh?
Oh, no, I'm just reading it.
Has a debit balance of 4,200. The cost sheet on the one job still in process. So if it has a debit balance of 4,200, this is what's still in process. The cost sheet of the one job still in process shows direct materials of 2,000 and direct labor of 700. And we want to figure out the overhead. Okay, so we know that this 4,200 is what's left in work in process. And what's included in this work in process is the direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. So we know that we had $4,200. And from there, we can take, we know that in that is direct materials of 2,000. And also there's 700 of direct labor in there included. So the difference must be manufacturing overhead. So if we started out with 4,200 left in work in process, and we know that in that is 2,000 for direct materials and 750 for direct labor.
700 for direct labor.
700, thank you. I was oh no, I actually subtracted 750. 4,200 minus 2,000 minus 700. 1,500, thank you. Is what manufacturing overhead would be. Are we good there?
Yeah.
This one gets complicated.
Yes.
Okay, yes. Okay, the company's overhead rate is 40% of direct labor costs. So that's our overhead rate. They've told us what the rate is. Using the following incomplete accounts, oh, I hate things like this. Determine the cost of direct materials used. Oh, I hate problems like this. I would never, okay. Sorry.
We hate them
Okay.
too.
I know, right? Okay, so okay, so we know that the overhead rate is 40% of direct labor costs. So I know that I can say I have finished goods and I have factory overhead. Oh my God, I hate this question. Yeah, I think maybe. I really hate this question. I hate this question because I hate this type of question. I don't think it's fair to ask. I hate this type of question.
So we're given factory overhead.
Right, and we have to fill everything else in.
So the factory overhead of 112,200 is 40% of something.
Yep. Oh, I can work all the numbers. I just hate this kind of problem.
Oh, okay.
I mean, like, I'm philosophically opposed to this kind of problem. And I'm giving everybody credit for it. I'll give you the answers, but I'm giving everybody credit for it. I hate that kind of problem. I hate it.
I'm trying to figure it out.
Yeah, it's I will give you the answer. Yeah.
Okay.
But I don't, this week is hard enough without me trying to confuse you. Period. Predetermined overhead rate. We want to figure out the predetermined overhead rate. Remember that for the predetermined overhead rate, we use the estimate over the estimate. So we have a job order costing system, and last period we incurred $60,000 of actual overhead and $90,000 of direct labor. Our actuals don't matter. Predetermined is always estimates. So we estimate that its overhead for the next period will be $80,000. So we have estimated overhead, $80,000. And it's also expected to incur $95,000 of direct labor. So estimated direct labor, which I know that's what we're using as a cost driver because it's the only information they gave us, $95,000. And when you do labor, pay attention to whether you're doing dollars or hours, because you could do it either way. And then you have to know when you go and calculate the overhead, you have to know whether you're using the rate applied to hours of labor or dollars of labor. So always pay attention to whether it's hours or dollars. So 80,000 divided by 95,000 is 0.842 or 84%. That make sense?
Yes.
And then what we would do is, to apply it, we would say for the actual direct labor for the job, the dollars, for every dollar of direct labor that's incurred, we're going to expense 84 cents as overhead. That's what that means. Okay, we want to do a year-end balance in the factory overhead account. Estimated total overhead cost. Oh, okay. So here's our manufacturing overhead account. Remember, actual goes in, estimates go out, right? Actual goes in, estimates go out. So Morris Company applies overhead based on direct labor costs. For the current year, Morris Company estimated total overhead costs of $500,000 and direct labor costs of 2 million. So we have to figure out our rate. So estimated overhead divided by estimated direct labor costs. So our estimated overhead is 500,000. Our estimated direct labor costs is 2,400,000. So our rate is 500,000 divided by 2,400,000. It's not very much. Not 20%. 20%. Are we good so far? So actual overhead cost for the year totaled 450,000. Actual goes here. Remember, that's actual. The direct labor cost totaled $1,800,000. So for that, we're going to say 1,800,000 times 20% equals $360,000. So this is based on our estimate. So we put in 450,000. We expense so far 360,000. So our balance is 90,000. Are we good there?
Yes.
Total manufacturing costs added during the period. Okay. So during 1 month, Minstrel purchased 200,000 of raw materials on credit. That goes into raw materials. That doesn't count. Issued materials to produce, so we have raw materials, which doesn't count. Okay, so we purchased 200,000 of raw materials. Has nothing to do with work in process. Issued materials to production of 210,000, of which 20,000 were indirect. So we took 210,000 out of raw materials. We obviously had a beginning balance. And of that 210,000, 190 are direct materials and 20 are indirect materials. Does that part make sense? Then we incurred factory payroll of 160, of which 30 was indirect. So 130 was direct labor and 30 was indirect labor. Minstrel uses a predetermined overhead rate of 150% of direct labor costs. So direct labor costs were 130,000. And our rate is 150%. So our overhead is going to be 130,000 times 150% is 195,000. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And then we're going to add them together. So 190,000 plus 130,000 plus 195,000 is 515. And that's the cost that were added. So we had to separate out the overhead from the direct materials, direct labor, and then to put the overhead in there, we had to use the predetermined overhead rate that they gave us. But you still have direct materials, direct labor, manufacturing overhead. We want to compute the overhead application rate. So we know that we have estimated over estimated. So at the beginning, allocates overhead to production on the basis of direct labor costs. That's our driver, direct labor costs. At the beginning of the year, add an estimated total overhead of $370,000. We don't care about the materials or the direct labor because they don't have anything to do with overhead. Estimated overhead at $370,000. During the year, and direct labor costs, direct estimated overhead of $370,000, materials of $410, and direct labor of $220. That we do care about. So our rate is going to be 370,000 divided by 220,000. Does that make sense? Are we good there? We don't need anything else. The actual doesn't matter. Actual does not matter for the rate. Estimated overhead divided by the estimated driver gives us our rate. Then what we would do is to apply it, we would say the actual, like what we would apply. We would say direct materials overhead. He actually had 230,000 in direct labor times the rate of 168%. So we would say 230,000 times 168%, 386,400. This is what our manufacturing overhead would be. But we aren't asked for that yet. All we're asked for is the application rate.
And that's just a percentage.
Yep. So, and the rate is determined, the overhead application rate is determined by estimate and estimate. When you apply it, then you use something that's actual, like this is actual. When you apply it, you use the actual amount. But when you're doing the rate, everything is an estimate. All right, we want to know what is the total cost that should be assigned to the job. Okay, so we have copy center pays an average, so cost. We know that we have direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead, right? Pays an average of $15 per hour to employees for printing and copying jobs, and allocates $20 of overhead for each employee hour worked. Okay, so materials are assigned to each job according to actual cost. If job M47 used 350 materials and took 15 hours of labor, so we know for our materials, our direct materials, we have $350. Took 15 hours of labor at 15 hours times $15,
225.
325
225. Two.
is, that's wrong. Is that wrong?
225.
225, thank you. So then our manufacturing overhead, we allocate $20 of overhead for each employee hour worked. So 15 hours times $20.
300.
Thank you. So we spent $300 in manufacturing overhead. So the cost of our job is $875. Good there?
Yes.
Okay. Equivalent units of production with regard to direct labor. So a company's beginning work in process inventory consisted of 25,500, so beginning work in process. We had 25,500 units that were 20% complete, because we're only worried about labor. These beginning units were completed, and another 9, okay, so these are done. So actually, let's say company's beginning work in process, 25,000 was 20 complete. The beginning units were completed, so now these are 100% done. The beginning units were completed, and another 98,800 were started. Of those, 65,500 were finished. And still in ending inventory, we have 33,300 that are 40% complete. So the ones that we started, we had beginning work in process. Here's what we started. So the 98,800, if we took 65,500 plus 33,300, that gives us the 98,800. So we're only worried about these. The finished ones are obviously 100% complete. These are 40% complete. So we have 65,500 units complete for direct labor. And in ending inventory, we have 33,300 units that are 40% complete. So that's the equivalent of 13,320 completed units. So we have a total of 78,820 units complete for direct labor. Are we good there?
Yes.
Number of units transferred to finished goods. This isn't as complicated. So we have our beginning work in process. We want to know what was transferred. We have our beginning amount of 240 units. we started 3,600. So we added to that work in process 3,600 units. We still have in ending inventory 440 units, which means that we must have finished 3,400 and transferred them out. So beginning plus everything we added minus ending, same formula. Good there?
Yeah.
Okay, we want to do equivalent units for materials and conversion. Okay, so I'm going to set up here equivalent units of production, and I have materials, and I have conversion. Because I'm going to do both of them separately. All right, now I'm ready. So, at the beginning of the month, the forming department, Martin, had 26,000 units in inventory. 30% complete as to materials and 15% complete, but these were at the beginning. During the month, the department started 76,000 units and transferred out 86,000 units. So 86,000 units are completely done, right? So we have completed and transferred out. If they're completed and transferred out, they're completely done for materials and conversion. Do you agree?
Yes.
At the end of the month, the department had 1,600 units in inventory that were 90% complete for materials and 60% complete for conversion. So if I take 16,000 times 90%, I have the equivalent of 14,400 units for materials. And if I take 16,000 times 60%, I have the equivalent of 9,600 units for conversion costs. All right, does that make sense? Put ending inventory here so you don't get lost. Is it making any more sense? We're almost done. Are you awake?
Still here.
Okay. Thank you for signs of life.
Still here.
Okay. Equivalent units of materials. So we know what our beginning inventory is. 30,000 units, 100% complete, and materials 55%. We started and completed 120,000 units. So we know that we completed and transferred out 120,000 units that were completely done, right? Units units started and completed. I didn't read very carefully. I don't want that one. I want this one. Completed and transferred out 150,000. We're just gonna put this over here. In ending inventory, I have 32,000. Hold on a sec. But that's not for an upset stomach. How's your stomach? All right, I'll be done in a little bit. I'm wrapping up. I've got a few more. 32,500 in ending inventory. So with the ones in ending inventory, they're 100% complete for materials and 30% complete for conversion. We're only concerned about materials. So when we put these units in, we finish them completely for materials. We put all the materials in at the very beginning. So we get to add all of those. So our total is 182,500. So you have to make sure we're looking at materials so that that's all you're focusing on. Good there?
Yes.
Make it easier. 19. If Pitt uses compute the equivalent units for direct materials and conversion for May. Okay, so I'm going to have not a lot of room. Materials, and I have conversion costs, right? So I want to know, what did I complete and transfer out? All materials are introduced at the beginning of the manufacturing process. Conversion costs are incurred uniformly throughout the manufacturing process. As the cutting of material is complete, the pieces are immediately transferred to the sewing department. So work in process, beginning, okay, there we go. Units started in May, units completed in May. So we completed 202,000 units. So those are complete for all of our costs. Now, in our work in process, our ending work in process, we have 76,000 units, 100% complete for direct materials, and 15% complete for conversion costs. So now I'm going to say my ending inventory, I have 76,000 units times 100% gives me my 76,000 here. And for conversion, I have 76,000 units times 15%, which is only 11,400. And that's it. That's all we're concerned about. So we have 278 and 213.4. Better?
Yeah.
Okay. Almost done. At the beginning of the month, we want to know how many units did forming departments start and complete in the current period. At the beginning of the month, the forming department of Martin Manufacturing how many units did the forming department start and complete? We had 24,000 in beginning inventory. The percentage complete doesn't matter. But they didn't start those, but they might have completed them. During the month, the department started 88,000. And they finished 90,000. At the end of the month, the department had 22,000 in ending inventory. Okay, so if we had 24,000, units deforming start and complete. And we let's do it this way. We know we finished 90,000 units, right? We know we finished 90,000 units. And of those 90,000 units, 24,000 had to have been from our beginning inventory. So we didn't start those. So we must have started and completed 66,000. That was tricky. But does that make sense?
Yeah.
Sorry, the numbers are small. Total conversion cost transferred out of the canning department. Total conversion cost, I'm getting tired. Total conversion, wait a minute, I'm missing part of the data on here. No, I'm not. Okay. Oh, they give us the data. We're good. So we want to know the total conversion cost, so we're only concerned with this column, transferred out of the canning department. So we have 68,000 units that were transferred out. Completed and transferred out. We have 68,000 units completed and transferred out. And we want to know the conversion cost. So we have 68,000 units. Our cost is $3.50 per unit. So that gives us 238,000 in costs. So what we're doing here is now we're taking our equivalent units and we're assigning cost to figure the total cost. Are we good there?
Yes.
Yes.
22. On 22, the journal entry to record June production activities for direct materials. So we're only concerned about the direct materials. So you are going to take them out of raw materials and put them into work in process. Because that's how you got your materials there. So the direct materials would go out of raw materials and into work in process. The indirect materials would go out of raw materials and into manufacturing overhead. Calculate the equivalent units of materials. I think you guys can do that because we've done a bunch of them. 24, good heavens. I can tell you that the answer here should be 162,500. You can practice it and call me if you don't get it. And we did this one. Honey, stop. Serious? Just a minute. I have a cat laying on my tablet. My cat's telling, I'm sorry, buddy. My cat's telling me go to bed. So when you work this, direct labor and factory overhead respectively. So we incur 81,000 in direct labor, in labor related directly to the product in the assembly department. 81,000 So we need direct labor and we need manufacturing overhead. So we know that we have 81,000 of direct labor related directly to the product in the assembly department. 30,000 of labor not directly related to the product, but related to the assembly department as a whole. And 17,000 of labor for services that helped production in both the assembly and the finishing departments. So this 30,000 isn't overhead. It's direct because it's directly related to the product in the assembly department. So this is direct labor and this is direct labor. And we have 17,000 for manufacturing overhead. Does that make sense? And the journal entry to account for cost of goods sold. So you have to think about where you're going from. So when we're going to cost of goods sold, we're coming out of finished goods. Because remember, we have raw materials, work in process, finished goods, and then cost of goods sold. So if we're looking at cost of goods sold, we're taking out of finished goods and putting into cost of goods sold. And then we want to know the amount that went out of that actually got sold. So the company had 173,500 of beginning finished goods on October 1st. It transferred in 850,000. The ending finished goods inventory balance on October 1st, 31st, was 171,200. So that means if I started with 173,500 and I added 850,000 and I still have 171,200, that means I must have transferred out 852,300. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
We're done. I will load this and I will load the recording in the morning. And I'm going to bed. Do you guys feel any better?
No, I don't get it still. I feel so terrible.
Okay. Work the problems, and then if you want to talk about it, if you guys want to meet on, if you want to figure out a way to meet on Saturday, we can. Work the problems. You can also call me with individual problems. I would expect you to feel overwhelmed right now. I really would. And the first week's the hardest. It gets easier after this. I promise you, it gets easier after this. But I also can tell you, I went to the test and I took the questions and I put them on here and changed numbers. So work with it, work with the practice problems, work the homework, call me if you have questions. Saturday I'm going to be in and out, but mostly available. I have to like drive to the rink and drive back. Okay?
Thank you.
And I'll post it. It's going to get better. It's going to be okay, I promise. It's just a lot in week 1.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'll see you guys on Tuesday. But call me with questions between now and then.
Good night.
All right. Good night, you guys.
Night, Professor. Good night, everyone.
Thank you for coming.